welcome back to the show, World War II Books Where to Start. I'm your host, Martha Gellhorn, here in Paris. And if you see my good-for-nothing two-timing husband, Ernie, anywhere around, feel free to give him a kick in the seat of the pants for me and tell him he's a no-good two-timing son of a beep. But while I'm in Paris, let's talk about the Ardennes Offensive, also known as the Battle of the Bulge. And if you're wondering why I have a U-boat shirt on for Battle of the Bulge, don't worry, it ties in. We'll get to that later. First, the stuff I didn't get to, because this is fairly new material to me. I don't really I've ever a book on the Bulge, and I read it again for this video, but it's pretty unfamiliar territory to me, and I'm going to blame a certain movie for my lack of interest over all these years. The notorious Battle of the Bulge, Henry Fonda. It kind of turned me off to it for 30 plus years. But the stuff I didn't get to, A was John Toland's Battle. Alex Kershaw's got two books, The Longest Winter and Patton's Prayer. I can't stand Alex Kershaw, so I won't go near that. And then there's this by Martin King, which I just kind of read the intro to, but I didn't get any further. He sounds kind of flippant and kind of arrogant, but we'll see. It's a short one. And then John Eisenhower's The Bitter Woods. This one I'm going to have to do another time. This looks to be very interesting and is highly regarded. So that's the stuff I couldn't get to. But we'll start here with the stuff I did get to. Okay, so the stuff I did get to, Anthony Beevor's Ardennes 1944, Battle of the Bulge. And I don't think I covered this before, but I did answer a viewer's question about it, so I don't think I've covered this in a video, but it's my second time through. As you know, I'm pretty well versed in Beevor. I really like him. So he's going to give you an all-around with a little bit of rivet counting. And he's really good with civilian experiences and getting you those little anecdotes that make it, the little juicy bits count. So he says about Rundstedt being a raging alcoholic, which was part of the reason why he was relieved in 41 in Russia, which I don't think I've ever seen before. And I had not remembered from my first reading of the book. Said he was screaming in the middle of the night, and his aides had to tie him down or calm him down and give him some brandy to get the screaming willies to go away. Never heard that before, but apparently that was part of the real reason Hitler sacked him in the first place. So it's kind of new info to me, kind of cool. Mouse holing, an American tactic, kind of like their version of Stalingrad street fighting. American GIs would go into a town and, armed with bazookas or captured Panzerfaust, they blow a hole in the wall with one of these things, and then grenades into the base floor, and then an armor-piercing shell, boom, straight up into the ceiling to get any snipers or sharpshooters in the top floors, and then they clear the building out. That's pretty cool. That's getting it done. Let's see. Of course, Ernie Hemingway, my beloved husband, is described as a war tourist, and it's kind of hard to disagree with this. He's a thrill seeker. He wants to be in on the action without being in the action. So he gets news of this terrible attack in the Ardennes, and he's got this really dramatic, they're going to shoot the whole works, we got to get up there. And he grabs a couple machine guns, and somehow he got a hold of a couple of grenades, I guess, and off to the front he goes. He's got some buddies up there. He kind of holed up with a particular division and a CP, and kind of rode out the battle there with some misadventures with his own urine. It's a hoot to read. It's hysterical. And he just pops up here and there a couple times, but Ernie, he's good comic relief. You gotta love it. Bradley is kind of pigeonholed as the crux of the biscuit here. He's the problem child. Both with his obsession with Monty, and he didn't want to be perceived as being caught off guard, having posted the 99th Division to a quiet sector front. Of course, the Germans attacked through there. He didn't want that on his record as being the fault for the reason the Bulge happened and the success it had. He's really paranoid and really touchy and really on edge. And when Eisenhower gives Monty the command of the northern side of the Bulge forces, really riles him up and flips his lid. And I don't know that he was ever the same after that. Whereas he had a mild dislike of Monty before, this becomes a raging inferno of hate afterwards, and sometimes affected his judgment. Bradley seen as kind of the linchpin of the problem here. The issue being he was promoted over Patton because of Patton's instabilities and slappy incidents in Sicily. Bradley seems more stable overall, a steady guy, keeps his hand on the pulse of things. But here in the Bulge, it's his failure. It's his failing moment. You might think he's due to exhaustion and pressure and being worn down over several months of the campaign, contributed to that. Don't know. But so Bradley's kind of fingered as the culprit here for the what German success there was. Fair or not, that's how Beevor sees it. Oh, and the movie Fury, the infamous Tiger versus Sherman scene that everyone loved to complain about how unrealistic it was. Well, there was a rough analog here in the Ardennes. There's a Tiger versus a Sherman going round and about a building, trying to get position on each other. Round and round and round like a demolition derby kind of thing. Whoever gets their gun turret bear first wins, except there's another Sherman laying off to the side of the village. Got a clear shot at the Tiger as it rounded the corner and blasted it. So as ridiculous and lambasted as that Fury scene is, it's got a close analog in truth. I thought that was pretty interesting. Patton poem. Oh, this is a gem. You got to hear this. Hold on. Let me find my source. All right, so apparently Patton had some poetical inclinations from time to time, and here's his little ode to the Battle of the Bulge. O little town of Houffalize, how still we see thee lie, above thy steep and battered streets the aeroplanes sail by. Yet in thy dark streets shineth not any goddamn light. The hopes and fears of all the years were blown to hell last night. Man, if that ain't Shakespeare worthy, I don't know what is. That's fantastic. Worth the price of admission right there. Good stuff. He does go over to Colmar Pocket and Strasbourg, and the fit de Gaulle had over our desire to retreat from Strasbourg, to relieve pressure on the line, maybe shift some reinforcements north. Of course, de Gaulle will have none of it. It's the honor of France. It's the soul of France. Strasbourg is French. You can't do that. And after some ballyhooing, with Churchill included, this got to high political levels, and Eisenhower had to fly down there to soothe some feathers. We eventually did hold on to Strasbourg and did not abandon that line. So it denied some reinforcements up north, but politics getting in the way of the battlefield, nothing new in the ETO. And then he covers the paratrooper debacle on the German side pretty well. A very ill-advised, harebrained scheme to fly ill-equipped, poorly trained division paratroopers in on airplanes with pilots who are hardly versed in the aircraft this late in the war, let alone a night drop, and had never dropped paratroopers before, and a howling wind and horrible weather. What do you think is going to happen? Disaster. So this was just part of the idiocy of the Ardennes attack, and this division is just wasted. Although it's not really a full division by any means. You got a few thousand guys scattered all over the place with a lot of casualties unnecessarily. They wander around, they starve, and eventually they surrender. Let's see. Oh yeah, there's the Band of Brothers episodes covering the Battle of Bulge, 3 or 4 episodes, and they're very good. But one thing I don't mention, at the beginning in the rest camps, they were suffering a lot of suicides and combat fatigue from being pulled out of the Nijmegen sector, I believe it was, from the Market Garden stuff. The Market Garden didn't end with the closing down of the Arnhem Bridge. The campaign went on for a while in defensive mode, and the 101st and 82nd were there holding their positions. So they were withdrawn as a strategic reserve to rest and recoup and rehab, but then they got called on to plug the gap at Bastogne and whatnot. So they were really kind of in bad shape, but they were all we had. We didn't have a really branded strategic reserve. Eisenhower fed every division he got into the line as they came over to the continent as that broad front offensive thing. So that's kind of interesting little tidbit on the 101st and the problems they were experiencing. Let's see. I think that's about it. It's a very good overview. It's about 350 pages, and it doesn't get bogged down too much in excessive rivet counting. He does like his order of battle. He will tell you where everybody was and what they're doing, so you can't get lost in units and divisions here and there, especially because the Bulge is such a piecemeal battle. It's this crossroads here, it's that crossroads there, it's a little village over there, it's a mountain ridge here, and it goes on in little pockets for a month. So it can get confusing, and it can be a big jumble. But Beevor is very good at condensing that into a comprehensible narrative. So I highly recommend Ardennes 1944. And before I go on with the stuff I did read, one thing I forgot to mention I didn't read was Company Commander for Charles McDonald, the classic memoir of Battle of the Bulge and the ETO combat. As I've mentioned before, I just did not find it worthwhile. I read it twice, once as a teen and then once as an adult. So anything I read as a teen didn't like, I go back again as an adult to make sure I wasn't, not getting the picture. And in the case of Charles McDonald, I just don't like his style. He's pretty much, we went here, we went there, we fired 20 rounds, that kind of thing. It's very mechanical, very procedural. You can't tell the guy's got any emotions at all, even though he was in the thick of the fighting. This is his first combat experience as an introduction to combat, and being a company commander, not sure he knows what he's doing, and he kind of felt like it was a failure afterwards. But it was barely readable to me, so I think I got rid of it somewhere along the line. I can't find it on my bookshelf, so I guess it's gone. But in case you're wondering why I didn't mention it, that's why. All right, so on to Snow and Steel by Peter Caddick Adams. This is from 2014 at a whopping 872 pages. This could have been and should have been, I think, a 2-volume experience. This guy's encyclopedic in some of the right ways and all the wrong ways. He's British, but you really can't tell because he is really pro-American in his writing. He's got nothing bad to say about the Americans, which is very odd for a British author. I'm going to say it flat out, it's very odd for a British author. So that puts you in a comfort zone, I guess, as an American reader. He's pro-American, but there's so much of this. Now I will say some of the encyclopedic, vast body of knowledge stuff was really cool because there's a lot of tiny details that he managed to squeeze in here because he doesn't want to leave anything out that are fascinating. However, the bloat and the overreach is amazing. He's going to give you callbacks to the early days of the Nazi regime with the Night of the Long Knives and Barbarossa, and I think even the Enabling Act, Hitler's mentality during his rise to power, and various personalities of the Reich, Himmler and Heydrich and Goering, that have absolutely diddly squat to do with the current matter on hand, the Battle of the Bulge. And then at the end of the book, we don't end with the January counterattack by the Allies. No, we go on to finishing out the war and our political objectives about taking Berlin or not. Monty's set piece offensive over the Rhine, the surrender of the Ruhr, make a separate peace, paranoid the Russians. Then we go on and on and on to the Berlin airlift in the Cold War. Not kidding. Suez Canal, everything up to like 91. Hell, he might have thrown 9/11 in there for all I know. I can't quite remember now. It was just a real screamer that this book wouldn't end. It just wouldn't end. It refused to end. It could have ended 4 or 5 times, but it didn't. It kept going. The overreach is just, I think it's a world record. So you've got that going against you. There's also a big whoopsie in the beginning where he's describing Sippenhaft as instant execution if you were found to have betrayed Germany in your military duties. You and or your family members will be arrested and immediately executed. That is a very bad parsing of the word Sippenhaft and how it was practiced. It especially came into effect after 20 July. Your relatives will be arrested, even if you weren't, on suspicion of having been involved in a plot to kill him, Hitler. And they might be executed, and some were. But for the most part, it was just detention without possibility of release. Kind of like the Nacht und Nebel thing. You kind of vanished into the prison system of the Gestapo, and you might not be heard from again. But Sippenhaft did not mean automatic execution, as he claims. He brings that up 2 or 3 times early on, and then he lets it go into the background of the narrative. And I'm not sure why he tried to push that as like a big threat to these guys in the field. They've got more pressing concerns with the next artillery shell coming in. But he makes it like a be-all, end-all, and it's just not. So I was very put off by that way of introducing material. But it does eventually settle down, because we've got he's going to go unit by unit with the Germans and the Americans, commanders, their units, how they got smashed at Normandy, or the experiences on the Eastern Front, their leadership issues, their quality of equipment and personnel. And then with the Americans, unit by unit, general by general, same thing. So there's a long build up to the actual fighting, which is actually pretty good. If you're into that amount of detail, kind of let you know all the units involved and all the personalities rolling around there. For some, it might be too much, but for this book, a lot of it might be too much for people. So then we've got, let's see what it is. Oh yeah, so the Bulge. The reasons for the Bulge. It's traditionally been the idea that Hitler knows there's nothing, he's sane enough to realize there's nothing you can do on the Eastern Front to make anything better. So why not try to split the Western Allies, blah blah blah, and attack through there, cross the Meuse to take Antwerp, and solve all our problems. He's going to take it a step sideways. He's going to claim this is a political battle. He fought this to reassert and reclaim his utter control over the German people and the German military after the assassination attempt of 20 July. He relates everything in the Ardennes to 20 July and says this was Hitler holding on to power the only way he knew how, by force, and by showing the people, the citizens of Germany, that Germany's armed forces could still win a battle, and there was hope and a reason to keep fighting. It wasn't all doom and despair. Interesting, maybe sort of has some validity to it, not sure. But then the really interesting part is his medical diagnosis and psychological diagnosis of Hitler after 20 July. And I found this to be very one of the best parts of the book. He's going to claim that he was more medically affected by the bomb blast than historians have traditionally allowed. And I would go along with this. The shaking limbs, the shuffling gait, the mental confusion, the sudden bouts of anger, all point to lingering effects. He was deaf in one ear for a while. He burst an eardrum, and he had ringing in his ears for a long time after that. Just really put him off balance. The 100 pieces of shrapnel of wood in his legs and body were easily removed and recovered fairly well from that. But some of the other nerve damage he might have suffered from the proximity of the blast was a lingering and ongoing effect that did not go away and affected his already shaky judgment. I would go along with that. And then goes into his mental issues. He says he might have been, not dyslexic, he might have been autistic, which I had never thought of before. And he's got a particular brand of autism he brings up. He must have delved into this pretty deep. And I found it fascinating. All his behavioral idiosyncrasies going back to the 20s, maybe to childhood with August Kubizek and his descriptions of Hitler's fanaticism about opera and whatnot. It all fits. Now, it might be tailor-made. You might say he's arguing, well, this says this, and this says this, and this says this, and Hitler did this, and this. Bingo, therefore, it is autism. And of course, there's no way we can know. Autism was even largely unrecognized. But it's fascinating food for thought. And I found it pretty interesting, and I thought it had some validity to it myself. The sudden bouts of rage and the unwillingness to listen to any contrary opinion, the flights of fancy, and maybe even fitting the death wish he had that he repeatedly spoke to in the 20s and 30s, that underlying death wish that came up and again. I'd always previously blamed it on his experiences in the Great War. Being exposed to shell fire for 4 years, being in constant danger, wounded twice by gas, exposed to enemy machine gun fire, living in the trenches for so long. I thought that had a permanent psychological effect on it. I'm sure it did. But bringing up the autism thing, it really is kind of an eye-opener. It's kind of fascinating. I think it's got a good potential of being true. So I found that to be one of the best nuggets I got out of this book. The author was also a NATO soldier, I think in the British Army, and his units were posted around the Ardennes battlefield in training exercises. And he's gone there as a tourist. He brings us up pretty consistent throughout. I walked here and I found, McDonald's command post and his foxhole. And I found some of the Band of Brothers foxholes. And I found this thing at this crossroads. I dug some shell casings here and there, and you can still see some of the metal splinters in the trees. It's fascinating stuff. That he was there, and he's well versed in the area. It's kind of a permanent tourist. Sounds like he goes there again and again. So that was pretty cool. Let's see. But there are other digressions, like the Roman legions in the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. Yeah, this is a deep dive. He's going to do that national character thing. This was forged here with the Roman legions fighting the Germanic tribes. the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, and the memorial monument that I think the Kaiserreich put up to the battle in late 1800s, before the Great War, because apparently it was there divisions would march past on the way to fight in France in the Great War, and Hitler supposedly had a rally there in the 30s underneath this huge memorial statue. And this was the importance of the Rhineland. This is their frontier. This is why they feel so emotional about it, and why Hitler felt that his soldiers would fight, especially strongly because of the ties to the Rhine and the emotional tie to Germany. Okay, well, unprovable. Just kind of a bizarre thing you might see in a Sunday newspaper op-ed. But is it valid military history here? I don't know. It sounds like you're just wandering and meandering and doing a little philosophical bollocking here. I'm not quite buying that. And it takes up a ton of pages to do this, so I'm not too thrilled with it. Let's see, what else did I miss? Oh, he overdoses on the German names. He's one of these writers that simply can't say general or field marshal. Es gab Herr Generalfeldmarschall, or Oberleutnant, or Herr General der Artillerie. All the time, incessantly, relentlessly, for every branch of the military involved, and it gets in the way of the narrative, and is really obnoxious. Now, I know that guys like Michael Reynolds and a couple others on the Eastern Front will do the same thing. I think this is kind of what Max Hastings is called Nazi porn, when you just overcook it and overdo it just for the thrill, like your little boy moving toy soldiers around the map as you're playing army. It's not just a bit much. It's really obnoxious and gets in the way of the reading. So really, it's a real eye roller the longer you go here. And then, okay, one last thing, the U-boat thing. So, U-boat shirt, Leopoldville, SS Leopoldville, 11,000 ton or 14,000 ton steamer that was rushing reinforcements to the continent on Christmas Eve in '44, specifically destined for the Bulge. About 2,300 U.S. soldiers, all U.S. soldiers, about effectively almost a whole regiment. You got a large crew, like 90 crew. They're all Belgians, and a Belgian captain chartered by the British with some British MPs as guards. Sunk by U-46 Oberleutnant, see what I did there, Gerhard Meyer, on his first patrol. He had somehow got his Type 7C out of Norway, all the way around the British Isles, had already sunk a freighter out of a convoy previously, and snuck up on the French coast on Christmas Eve, and there's Leopoldville, apparently unescorted. I read the Blair section on it to be sure. Blair doesn't mention any escorts, and he said this is guy's first patrol, and he was previously a destroyer officer. He was commissioned right into command of a boat. He never served as a first watch officer even. He was booted straight into a boat in command, and his first patrol. This guy's a gem, a diamond in the rough. What kind of talent and luck do you have to have this late in the war, being new to the boats and scoring a success like this? So he puts 2 torpedoes into Leopoldville. It sinks in 30 minutes. He gets away clean, and like I think 780 guys drown. The rest are rescued, but they're effectively out of action because they're all soaking wet and sick, exposure and oil and all that. So they're denied reinforcements for the Bulge right there. Now, Caddick Adams says this was covered up until '95 with a Clive Cussler find on the seabed. But checking Ambrose's footnote on this, he says there was a partial release of information in '59. So I'm going to go with that as being more likely to be true. So just a little gem there to kind of check up on that and find the whys and wherefores of that. But just shows you, even late in the war, occasionally the U-boats could get lucky, and allies were still screwing things up. It's just kind of amazing they could do this. To let a U-boat around. Apparently he wasn't using his Enigma much at all. No radio chatter, or they would have been on this guy real fast. So an unnecessary tragedy. Ambrose is going to blame the Brits for this debacle entirely because he's Ambrose. You can ignore that. So overall thoughts, a soft 3 stars. This could have been easily chopped into 2 volumes to make it a more palatable experience. The gross overreach from the end of the war to the end of the Cold War is inexcusable. There's no call for it. And I would recommend it as, for completionists only. It was way more than I bargained for. And I certainly wouldn't do it again. And this is part of a trilogy. He's got a Sand and Steel for Normandy. He's got a Fire and Steel for the end of the war, which I have back here behind me. And I'm terrified to even try it. So that's that. That is, what I say, Snow and Steel by Peter Adams. And then to finish up today, just some of the extra media stuff. We got the aforementioned Battle of the Bulge. I said Peter Fonda early. Henry Fonda, Robert Shaw. Robert Shaw was like the worst Nazi officer ever. Complete plastic. Man, he's terrible. With his severely bleached blonde hair. Oh man, that's bad. Now this is the same director that did The Longest Day just a couple years before. And right here they make a total hash out of it with a decent budget. Even if they have to use the post-war tanks because Franco offered them. I get that. But there's no attempt at reality at all. They don't use any real officer's name. There's just no connection to reality. If you watch that movie cold and didn't know any better, you think it was just a pure fictional story set within the war. Then there's this turkey, Battle of the Bulge, Winter War. Tom Berenger and Billy Zane struggling to get through this. Their heart's not in it. They've got very little ability for it. And I got through half of it. I may finish, I may not, but it's pretty awful. And then the best of the bunch, A Midnight Clear, starring some of the younger talent at the time, a very young Gary Sinise amongst them, based on a novel. So it's got some novelistic issues. Ethan Hawke's in it too. It's got some novelistic tendencies. It's a small unit stuck out in an outpost position, reconnoitering for intelligence purposes. You've got an asshole officer back of the back saying, we need information, get it to us or else, blah, blah, blah. So you've got the standard setup. But within that, it's a fairly interesting little story. We involve the Christmas shenanigans of the Germans and their sentimentality. And of course, we have a switch up to alter the narrative that changes everything. And carried off fairly well. There's a couple moments with the dialogue and the scene setting I thought was kind of cringy and needed a rethink, but it's pretty watchable overall. And then there's, of course, Battle of the Bulge, Axis and Allies, which is the reason I mentioned it specifically is that they're dropping a new edition of it this year, a second edition. So I have not played the original, but I would be interested in playing this one. It's going to be a 2-player only, of course. And it sounds, I'm trying to get back in the Axis and Allies this year, so I may report on that later in the year. Don't know. Of course, like I said, there's the Band of Brothers episodes. That's probably the best representation, although a very small smidgen, of the battlefield. And then there's Patton and his glorious ride to the rescue, which I will say, in both the Adams and the Beevor book, he's mentioned the impossibility of turning his army 90 degrees and coming north to rescue is great, but then he kind of fades out in the narrative. And Beevor does say he didn't have as much success against the southern shoulder as it's kind of portrayed in the movie, that his forces were actually struggling against that side of the German attack and didn't do that well. But he fades out of the narrative. He pops up every once in a while, like, for the poem De Houffalize. But he's here, he's there, he vanishes, poof, he pops up again. But he's not as big of a deal as you might expect him to be. So there's that. But that's my report on the Battle of the Bulge. Just be part 1, somewhere down the line, maybe a year or 2 from now. I'll try to do a part 2 with the other books I didn't get to this time. But until then, I am Arthur Gellhorn. I'm going to write some Pulitzer Prize material, pop out a couple novels after the war, and get rid of that deadbeat, no good husband of mine. I've got another dude in mind, this airborne general, Jim Gavin. He's pretty cute, and I think I'm going to get along with him just fine. Until next time, happy reading.